We were tricking babies into testing whether or not they were capable of depth perception. So can they see in 3D? Is depth perception something that we're innately born with, or is it something that we develop over time? So depth perception allows us to see in 3 dimensions. It allows us to gauge distance between things. And so sometimes we can see that in art with 2-dimensional figures, but we have different monocular cues that tell us this thing's supposed to look closer than the other thing, or this thing's supposed to be clearer than the other thing. But in terms of, real life 3D, this visual cliff, which was one of your vocabulary words, was the method in which experimenters tried to illustrate that infants, right, very, very young humans, could perceive depth. So yes, this is an experimental method, but notice how none of the babies were harmed, so there were no ethical issues. So it wasn't like they were testing like, hey, is there a critical period or a sensitive period for babies in order to learn how to see or learn how to hear? Okay, so they're not doing sensory deprivation, which could be problematic in terms of ethics. Instead, they're merely just testing what a baby is able to do. No babies were injured in this trickery. So are y'all ready to watch babies be tricked? It turns out they're not as dumb as they look. Although, I don't know, how smart can a baby be if it constantly learns about its environment by just sticking stuff in its mouth?
As soon as a baby can move about, he can be observed in the same way as other animals. This is what the baby sees when he is placed on the center platform and looks at the far side. His mother stands opposite him, twirling a toy and beckoning to him. 36 babies, 6.5 to 14 months old, were placed in the center like this one and watched while their mother stood for 2 2-minute periods on each side. Here is another baby who has just been placed on the board. Almost all of the babies went to their mothers at the near side, as this one is doing. This baby, too, is going to his mother on the near side. But when the mother stood at the far side, nearly all the babies refused to go to her, like this one.
The baby's trust no one. All right, so when it comes to depth perception, we have different types of depth perception based on how many eyes we have. So you have binocular cues. Bi means 2, ocular means eye. So this is referencing you typically having 2 eyes. So binocular cues are depth cues that rely on the use of those 2 eyes. So first example, you have retinal disparity. Y'all know what a retina is. It's the back of your eyeball where all your cones and your rods are for color perception as well as movement and low light conditions. Disparity means difference. So this is talking about the difference, the disparity in your retinal images. I want everybody to focus on an object that is far away, like 6 feet or so away. Just look at an object. If you close one eye, close your left eye, and then you close your right eye and switch back and forth, does that object move a lot? All right, everyone should be saying no, but
It does.
it moves a little bit. Does it move a great amount? Okay, so it moves a tiny little amount, right? Now take your hand and put it in front of your face. Do the same thing. Open one eye and then the other. Yeah, your hand moves. Now, is your hand actually physically moving? No. What's happening is that you are getting 2 different images. Okay, you're getting 2 different images in your eyes, and your mind automatically overlaps them. So it takes the stuff that is the same in the middle and then it combines them together, kind of like Photoshop or Adobe. So basically doing that with your eyes. That repeating information is just mixed together in the middle. So the closer the object is, the larger the difference. So that's why when your hand is close to your face, you're able to see that when you open and close each eye, they shift in a much larger amount than the thing that you're looking at in the distance, where it hardly moves. It just moves a little bit. And part of what does this is your cue of convergence. So to converge means to come together. So this is talking about how much your eyes come together as something is closer to your face. If my hand is out here and I'm looking at it, then my eyes are not converging very far. They're just converging a little. But if I bring it closer to my nose, then you see that I become cross-eyed. So they're converging very heavily there. So as your eyes start moving inward to connect to something they're seeing, that is the level of convergence. So retinal disparity is a binocular cue, and convergence is a binocular cue. Now, in your IDs, don't just say, oh, convergence is one of the binocular cues that we use to perceive depth. Well, yeah, tell me what it is. Don't just say it's a binocular cue. You have to tell me what it actually does. When you're defining your ID terms, think of in the context of if you saw this definition on a quiz, would you be able to narrow down what it's actually talking about? And if you just list like, oh, this was a method of grouping, that was a method of grouping, this was a method of grouping, that doesn't give you any differentiation. Okay, now with monocular cues, if binocular cues are dealing with two eyes, then monocular is dealing with one eye. So these are depth cues that you will have available to each eye separately. So even if you are missing an eye or you lose eyesight in one eye, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be completely unable to perceive depth. In fact, we often perceive depth through two-dimensional images in what we see in art. So some of the monocular cues that we have include interposition and linear perspective. These are probably the most common or most familiar ones that y'all come into contact with. If any of you have ever taken an art class, like taught me how to draw a three-dimensional cue, in order to do that, I would have to use interposition. So I would draw one square right here and another square right here. And you see where they overlap in this area. Then I would just connect the lines to the corners. So it creates this perception of depth by having one thing in front of the other thing and then connecting the lines. Now, in this particular version of interposition, it's talking about distance. So how do we perceive three-dimensional differences with monocular cues? Well, if you look at this king of clubs, it appears closer to us than the king of spades because we are missing information about the king of spades in this area. But in our mind, instead of just perceiving it as this card is missing 1/4 or 25% of itself, instead we perceive this card as being on top of the other. So that gives us the image of this one being closer than this one. With linear perspective, well, linear means line. So this is when you're using lines to converge in order to create the perspective of distance. So for instance, we see that these lines converge over here. So that makes it appear as if these people or these drawings are a different distance from each other. Even though we see that they are perfectly the same size and they're just two-dimensional, we have a different perspective of who is closer to this point than the other point based on the lines. This is also where we tie into the moon illusion, where we have the horizon that gives us the perspective of whether the moon is closer or farther away, or the molar lyre. Okay, this is when you have two parallel lines, and which of these is longer? No, they're the same length. But then if you change the environment and do this, then which one appears longer? The top one appears longer because you have these arrows changing the environment, a type of Ponzo illusion. Same thing here. I draw a line and I draw a line. They are the same length, but when I draw two oblique parallels, the one on top appears longer than the one below it, even though they're the same length. So we've got the Ponzo illusion and the Muller-Lyer illusion, all of which involve lines. We're actually going to look at some art in which parallel lines are used to give the perception of distance in a much more artistic manner than just this. Next two, we're going to look at shadow and texture. So lighting as it relates to distance. Nearby objects reflect more light, and so they tend to be brighter. The brighter the image, the closer it is perceived to be. The dimmer object appears to be further away because we can't see it as clearly. We don't have as much clarity associated with it. So for instance, right here, this shadow and this light, what we see here, is very clear. You can even see the texture gradient here. But as we get further away, it gets dimmer. So shadows and lighting can affect our perception of whether or not something is closer or farther away. Now, in terms of texture gradient, you can also see that in this image, even though it's dealing with light and shadow. You can see the detail of the grass very close up to us, but as you get further away, that detail becomes more blurry. So blurrier equals farther away. Clear equals close. And you can see the same thing in two-dimensional art rather than just actual pictures. So for instance, we can very clearly see the lines on this man's jacket and his arm and on his stomach, or the crease in his pants, like his knee is right there. We can see the creases in this woman's dress. We can see his facial expression and his facial hair. And then the lining on these umbrellas. All of that is very clear to us. Therefore, we perceive it as close. But what about this person back here? It's very blurry. It's very grainy. And so we're given the illusion of them being further away. The closer they are, the more clearly you can see their details. The farther away they are, the blurrier the details get. Same thing with parallel lines. So here in this building, we have a parallel line converging here in the distance, multiple parallel lines. This gives us the illusion of this part of the building being closer to us than, say, this part. Now, it's a two-dimensional picture, so there isn't really any distance. It's just a piece of paper. But because of these lines, we perceive distance. So that goes back to linear perspective. But we also have it in terms of texture and how clearly we can see the images in the picture. So when y'all look at the two colors in that cube, what two colors do you see? Gray and white. Yeah, a gray and a lighter gray or a darker gray, whatever. Now I want you to take your finger and then put it over the line in the middle. What color do you see?
They still look different. Miss McNeil, you lying right now.
No, they're the same color. They're the same color. Yeah, if you take out this part, this entire part, because you see how it has like this shadow here, and then it has this line and another shadow here. Those shadows are adding the perception of depth. Okay, so what this is showing is the corn sweet illusion, which is an amazing name. It has nothing to do with corn. It has nothing to do with being delicious. Okay, it's just the guy's last name. It works by contrast. So when we perceive color and shading, we perceive the scene as three-dimensional. So we have a light source that's coming from up here somewhere that is giving this perspective of shadow. So with that shading, we have the two different colors. So we think the upper one is actually darker than the bottom one. But if you take out all of the shadows, what do you see happen? This color is the same as this color. So you can see how lighting can change your perspective of two-dimensional and three-dimensional images. Everyone's brain is broken. Also, another monocular cue that we have is relative size and relative height. So here we can also see the influence of linear perspective, because you see all of these lines converge into the distance where this weird dude is. But you may also perceive this dude, let's call him dude 1, as smaller than dude 2. But if you take your hand, yeah, I don't know what to feel about this picture either. It came with the slideshow. If you take your hand and you measure dude 1, and then take that same hand and move it over to dude 2, you'll find that they are the exact same size. So relative size and relative height, that deals with where on the horizon we see this image. So this dude is higher in the horizon, and so we perceive him as farther away than this dude, who is lower in the horizon. When your brother takes the aux cord. No, I think driver has to have the rules for the radio. So see, like, you have these lines going in this direction, and as they all get closer and closer, whereas this guy, you may have like 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. This guy, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so like they're tinier, and so they give the illusion of him being larger because it's in relation to the blocks around him. Another thing that we see with this illusion is the idea of perceptual sets or schema. Schema are just scripts. For instance, when you look at this image, they are both the exact same weird looking dude, right? Their facial expressions are the same. Big eyes, open mouth, their hands are both reaching this way. But based on our perceptual set, we might see dude 1 as running away in fear. Okay, so wide eyes are fear, and then the mouth open, he's screaming. And then the bigger guy in the background behind him, we may perceive him as the monster who's chasing him. So eyes are open with fury, and he's screaming and reaching out for the little guy. So our schema can change our perception of what's going on. Also, we follow scripts like this in our day-to-day life. For instance, when you go to a restaurant, let's say you go to the Olive Garden, because that is the peak of Italian food, right? Like those breadsticks, they're amazing. Side note, take them out of the bag before you microwave them, because it turns out that bag is covered with aluminum foil on the inside. You know, you learn some things along the way. I had a friend who really liked breadsticks, but I'll go ahead and save y'all some trouble in your life. Just completely skip Applebee's. It's not worth it. There's no reason for you ever in your life to go to an Applebee's. Just it's not good. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, schema. So when you walk into the Olive Garden, do you immediately find a chair and sit down? No. You wait until what happens? You sit on the floor? Okay, yeah, animal. Remind me to not go out in public with you. Just show up to the Olive Garden. She just throws herself on the floor like a child, like, carry me. That sounds more like me from personal experience when I was a 2-year-old. No, seriously, my parents dragged me through a mall once because, and I completely understand this. I don't blame them at all. But we were looking at the Christmas decorations and they were done and I wasn't. Oh. So I just threw a fit and I just went complete dead weight screaming. And they just had me by my hand and were dragging me across the floor. It's like, if you've ever been a parent, then you understand. You're just like, sometimes it be like that. I don't know if y'all could hear that. She said that they were at the country club and they were eating peanuts and she didn't like peanuts, so she decided to pull the fire alarm.
Yeah, I have no memory of this. I remember pulling it. I don't remember when I decided to pull it.
That's beautiful.
I was really young, though. I was like 5.
That's still too old. You're potty trained. No, that's pure id. You were completely dominated by your id. I love it. You love to see it.
So.
Bored with the peanuts. Like, I'm just going to cause chaos.
Yeah, right.
No, I agree. It's like I might do the same thing with raisins. So you walk into the Olive Garden, you automatically say something in Italian so you feel cultured. And then you wait. What? You do it in Mexican restaurants, don't you? You wait until the hostess comes and she takes you to your booth, which you should always get a booth, not tables, okay? So you sit down in your booth and then the waiter comes up to you. Now, when the waiter arrives, do you immediately order your meal? Nathan's just like, yeah, I know what I want. No, you order drinks. And then maybe you order appetizers with your drinks. But typically how it happens is you sit down. If I'd ever gone to a sit-down restaurant, y'all know I'm poor. But from what I've heard, you go to a restaurant, you sit at a booth, the waiter comes up, asks you what you like to drink. No, I eat on the floor with Elizabeth. And then that you ask, what appetizers you have. Maybe you have a coupon. Okay, so you're going to get to a bloomin' onion. And then when you get your appetizers, the waiter comes back and asks, what would you like for your entree? And then by then you're already full and you're like, I already got my buy one, get one. I'm good. Box up the rest. So then when you're done eating, your script can go one of two ways. The waiter can come up and ask you if you want dessert, or your waiter can give you the check, or you can dine and dash, I assume. Yeah, y'all, if you see me running, then you need to start running too, because it's not going to happen. Like, it wouldn't take them much to catch me, because I'd be going like sloth speed. Yeah, when someone says, have a nice meal, and you're like, thanks, you too. That's a beautiful script. All right, so typically what happens with me when I'm at a sit-down restaurant, it doesn't matter if I'm with a girl or a guy, if they're older or younger, I always get the check. I must have like big girl energy or something, where I'm just like, clearly I'm the one in charge. Clearly I'm the one with the means to pay for this check. And I'm actually not. My cats eat better than I do, but they always, never fails, give me the check. Now, typically in our schema, who typically gets handed the check? The guy, because sexism, because the patriarchy, right? And the guys are here like, yeah, you girls should pay for our meals next time. I usually go splitsies. And then I reply, okay, when I get paid 100% instead of 73%.
Exactly.
So with our schema, we have specific scripts that we tend to follow. Now, a lot of our schemas have changed due to Corona. For instance, if y'all walked into my class at the beginning of the year in 2019 and you saw this with my, barriers and me wearing a cat mask, you'd probably be like, Miss McNeely has lost it. But now that we have this understanding of there's a pandemic, this is what we're doing, you're going to see plexiglass in nail salons and in restaurants, and there's going to be reduced capacity. Now we have a new schema and new rules that we follow as a result. And that goes with top-down processing, where we already have an assumption and then we fill in the blanks based on previous knowledge. Another relative monocular cue that we're going to cover is relative motion. Now, this is different from motion parallax. In motion parallax, you and the thing are moving. So if you're in a car and you see a plane above you, you're moving and the plane is moving. That's motion parallax. You may be moving in different directions, but you're both moving. Relative motion is when you're stationary and something is moving. So for instance, with a plane, if you're stationary on the ground, that plane is going to be moving very, very slowly. You're going to be like watching it just crawl across the sky. And you're like, wow, that's stupid slow. In reality, logically that plane is going at like the speed of sound. It is supersonic. But because you're so far away, it looks like it's moving slowly. So the further away something is, the slower it appears to move. The closer something is, the faster it appears to move. So if you're on the interstate and someone zooms past you in the left lane, you may perceive that as moving faster than the plane that's thousands of miles above you. And it's because of relative motion. All right, next, the phi phenomenon. This is an illusion that makes us think that something's moving. Okay, so have any of you ever seen those lights, Cowgirl? So when they give the illusion of movement with like the first light, she's like holding a lasso, and then the second light, it looks like the lasso's moving and maybe she kicks her leg. That's stroboscopic movement, also known as the phi phenomenon. So this is when stationary lights that aren't actually moving blink off and on quickly, and we perceive it as movement. So like this lights up, then this, then this, then this. So it makes it look as if there's a continuous line moving to the right. Also with those little flip books. Have you ever had the flip books where it's all stationary images, but they're slightly different and you flip it and it looks like it's running and moving? It's an illusion that gives us the idea of something actually moving. Also with perceptual constancy. Perceptional means perception, how you interpret things. Constancy means that it stays the same. So even though the image changes on our retina, we still perceive these two-dimensional objects as the same. This can be with shape, size, and color. Now, color is the easiest. So like, let's say that if I turn out the lights, y'all know that your desk didn't just change color. The only thing that changed was the amount of light in the room. So you know, regardless of whether the lights are on or off or half on or dimmed, that your desk is the same color as it was minutes before. That is color constancy. In terms of size and shape constancy, well, with size constancy, you know that a plane that is really close to you is big, but a plane that is super far away from you, even though it looks small because of its distance, you also know that it's actually the same size plane. So regardless of its distance from you, you know that it's not changing size, it's just further away. In terms of shape, our best example is this perception or this illusion of a three-dimensional door. So we know that this shape is a rectangle, but then we're given the illusion of the door opening, which is something that fits our schema. And so you see that it becomes more trapezoidal. It becomes less of a perfect rectangle and more like a rhombus. Now, even though it appears to change its shape and have different lines rather than straight across and straight down, we still perceive that door as being the same shape. It is still square, or rectangular, I should say. But this difference from this difference is simply showing a change in motion, a movement of the door.